As with many social movements in this day and age, the MeToo movement began as something laudable, something admirable. Women who had been victimized by powerful men coming forward to name their attackers and make them face the consequences of their actions. And when the MeToo hashtag first started trending, I remember being shocked and horrified to see that so many women I knew had in fact been sexually assaulted or raped, and that it actually made me admire them even more because they had gone on to live such vibrant and interesting lives and not taken this act of violence against them as something that would define them for the rest of their lives. I mean, I'm sure they carry it with them every day of their existence, but they haven't let it destroy them as people, and that's something to be applauded. However, I also think that a lot of women saw this outpouring of support and sympathy for these women as something to be envied, and so they wanted a little piece of that victim pie for themselves, and they came forward with their own stories. Now, these were not stories of sexual assault or rape or any sort of violence, criminal or otherwise. They were stories of garden variety harassment or off-color comments or catcalling or these things that, while women do indeed face them on an everyday basis and they're not something that should be considered okay, they're also not on the same level as sexual assault. And the fact that these women were coming forward saying, "Me too, me too," sort of equates their quote-unquote suffering with the actual suffering of victims who have endured sexual violence. This is not okay. This is insulting to the victims of sexual violence. This dilutes the meaning of the term sexual assault. This is sort of a crying wolf and attention-seeking behavior. And more than anything else, I would say it shines light on how our society has placed victim status on a pedestal as something that all women can aspire to, that this is something that you are then excused from the need to distinguish yourself in any other field. In no sane society should somebody actively seek out the victim label. I mean, think what it entails. It means you're a passive object of male sexual aggression or other violence, that you have no agency in a sexual encounter, and that you are in need of protecting and otherwise not capable of making your own way in the world. This is not to speak ill of victims. As I said before, I admire these women for going on to have these vibrant, interesting lives. I'm sure they carry this traumatic event with them every day, but they haven't let it define them as people. And these sort of piggybackers have decided that they want this event to define them as people, whether or not it was actually traumatic. And I'm sorry, a guy patting you on the ass or saying, "Hey, baby," on the street is not traumatic unless you are just so hopelessly thin-skinned that you just spend your life quivering in your basement like a bowl of Jell-O. And honestly, I don't think there's a whole lot of people who spend their lives in their basement quivering like bowls of Jell-O. I think that a lot of people are trying to get a piece of this victim pie because it confers upon them a certain low-level fame or social status that they might not have otherwise. And that's a really cynical way of looking at things, I understand, but it's also a really cynical behavior. I mean, why should you want to apply the victim label to yourself when you're not actually a victim? Why not distinguish yourself in some other realm? There's plenty of opportunities for you to achieve something creatively, artistically, professionally, entrepreneurially, even financially. I mean, make a bunch of money. That'll get you social status in our capitalist utopia. But no, victim status is not the way to go. And this fetishization of the victim actually goes against what 100 years of feminism are supposedly trying to accomplish. The idea that men and women are on an equal level, that women can have sexual agency in their own encounters, that we are not in need of protection by society or by some sort of cushioning from reality. And so feminists should be up in arms against this piggybacking movement. Obviously, the original Me Too is very strongly in the feminist current because it's women sort of calling out these powerful men and saying, you can't keep me down, you can't oppress me. And that's great. But the idea that Me Too has sounded a death knell for the patriarchy, unfortunately, it's been sort of redirected to do just the opposite and reinforce this patriarchal notion of women as lesser beings, as something to be controlled, as a passive object of male sexual aggression. So this is going down the wrong route, and as the death toll of men who've seen their careers and livelihoods decimated by sexual assault accusations rises. I mean, I think the latest Charlie Rose, but you've also seen some ludicrous names on this list, like Ron Jeremy. So a woman comes forward and says, well, I went to an adult film event, and Ron Jeremy was there, and he groped me. Now, this is Ron Jeremy we're talking about, the famous grotesque but famous porn superstar. Now, Ron Jeremy at an adult film event, what do you expect? And you're there having your tits signed by Ron Jeremy, and you say, oh, he groped my boob. Well, what's he supposed to do? Sign it with his mind? Like, this is absurd. And this woman writing this tearful, oh, I was so scared. He stuck his hands down my pants. I was so scared. Yet I went back into the room multiple times to get my picture taken with Ron Jeremy. Well, obviously you weren't scared because you went back multiple times to have your picture taken and get other things from him. And so, unfortunately, this Me Too has led a lot of women who were not victimized sexually or who experienced these minor things like a groping or a off-color comment to recast their experiences, whether or not they were traumatic. And in the Ron Jeremy archetype here, sorry, you went back multiple times to have your picture taken with the guy. Clearly you weren't so terrified that you were not able to return to the scene of the crime, as it were, to page through their sexual experiences to find one that they can sort of recast as non-consensual or traumatic or assaultive or otherwise different than what actually went down. Now, of course, we have these gray areas like, oh, well, this was bad sex, or this was drunken sex, or maybe I wasn't so enthusiastic about this sex. But if you have to dig through your memories and find something that maybe you weren't so enthusiastic about this sexual encounter, so maybe it was non-consensual. Maybe if you gotta do this series of maybes and these logical contortions and this recasting, reimagining of your sexual past as something worthy of inclusion in the Me Too hashtag, I'm sorry, you weren't traumatized, you weren't violated. You might have been uncomfortable or, again, unenthusiastic or just had bad sex. I mean, it happens. I'm sorry. We hate to say we learn from our mistakes, but if you want to be considered an adult sexual being with your own agency, you can't have it both ways. Camilla Paglia has gone into this in far more depth than I have time to do here, but yeah, you can't have it both ways. You want to be considered as an adult sexual being with your own agency, you have to take responsibility for yourself. You can't expect others to protect you, and you can't expect others to keep you safe from the consequences of your actions. So, unfortunately, we're being encouraged to sort of relinquish that agency, to recast ourselves as victims, when this is very dangerous to what 100 years of feminism have fought to secure. Very dangerous to the idea of women as independent beings with their own agency, whether sexually or otherwise. This is not something that we should encourage, and unfortunately the Me Too movement has turned into this sexual witch hunt, this sexual Red Scare that is being used to take down men who maybe didn't deserve to be taken down. I mean, for every Harvey Weinstein, there's somebody who just maybe patted somebody on the ass 30 years ago, and now this woman is coming forward saying, that guy patted me on the ass. He needs to go down. And I'm sorry, if the extent of his sexual violation is he patted you on the ass 30 years ago, then, I mean, what he did was inappropriate? Sure. Did it violate your bodily integrity? Perhaps. But it's not something he deserves to lose his job over, especially if it's the only thing that you can find that he did. And some of these accusers, I think, are capitalizing off of this. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, the idea that our society holds the victim as this pinnacle of what a woman can achieve, you see women sort of reaching for that. And as much as I don't like Roy Moore, I think he's a theocratic douchebag, and I don't support him at all, I also think that he's being unfairly targeted. I mean, timing is very important, and one must always look at who benefits from these things. And the fact is that he was a public figure for decades before this election. Why did this woman not come forward with her story here? By this woman, I'm referring to the one with the signed yearbook in 2 different colors of ink that gets not only his name spelled wrong, I mean, it's dubious looking at the thing whether it says Ray or Roy, and he wasn't the district attorney at the time, so it shouldn't say DA, and the name of the restaurant, I believe, is misspelled as well. But the 2 different colors of ink is what really gets me. I'm sorry. I mean, you have to really have no critical capability whatsoever to believe that this is a signature of Ray Moore. And the fact that Gloria Allred won't have the handwriting analysis done. Sorry, that story stinks to high heaven, and there are a couple of other stories like this, but the Roy Moore one, I think, is the most in the public eye. Obviously, there are some good things that have come out of this, that these powerful men are being taken into account for their victimization of women and their using of power as a tool with which to victimize women. And I think that in the future, powerful men might actually be more careful about how they treat women, either women they employ, women they work with, or whatever. But I also think that this is being used as a wedge to drive between men and women, as the tried and true method of the ruling class to control the rest of us has always been divide and conquer. This idea of the divided nation paradigm is what perpetuates this whole left versus right divide, when I think liberals and conservatives have a lot more in common than either side would like to admit as far as what they want to see their government doing or not doing. Basically, this red scare, pink scare, is being used to turn men against women and women against men. Women are now being encouraged to see all sexual advances by men as some form of victimization or a prelude to victimization, or just this sort of extension of the evil patriarchy which must be taken down. And men are being taught to see women as the minefields of possible repercussions as far as sex goes, so maybe it's better just to avoid that altogether, or you have to ask for consent every step of the way and turn sex into a business transaction. This is not good for human sexuality. I mean, as the religious restrictions on human sexuality have come off, now it's being clamped down by this other, social sort of repression, this idea that all sexuality victimizes women in some way, or that all sexuality that doesn't involve a signed contract at every step of the sexual encounter victimizes women in some way, which is absurd, and it's absurd on its face, and I think that most people realize this, but they're afraid to say it because the mainstream media is pushing this narrative that men are all abusers, or men are all victimizing women, or all men are potential victimizers, and women are all potential victims. And also, there's the idea that innocent proven guilty is the foundation upon which our justice system is based. And now we've seen an erosion of that, obviously, with the idea that we can hold people indefinitely on suspicions of terrorism, which has, that word is another one that's just been completely, the meaning has been drained from it. That human sexuality is now this minefield of possible victimization or possible crime. And this is just how the ruling class wants it. We don't want men and women cooperating to form strong relationships, whether sexually or otherwise, to rip out the throats of their oppressors. Now, am I speaking metaphorically or literally? I'll let you be the judge of that, but that's the whole idea of this divided nation paradigm, is that to prevent the people, basically, the people who are not the members of the ruling class, from joining together to realize who their true oppressors are and pointing the finger at the wrong people. You've got men pointing the finger at women for being feminazis, or being just too uptight, or whatever the accusations may be, or women pointing the finger at men for being victimizers, for being patriarchal douchebags, for basically keeping them down. And men and women would do well to realize that they're pointing the finger in the wrong direction. Unfortunately, as with any good witch hunt, you see innocent people thrown under the bus along with legitimate assaulters. And just like the Red Scare began in Congress rooting out actual communists among their ranks, it eventually degenerated into this sort of book-burning ideological frenzy wherein many people in Hollywood and other aspects of the entertainment industry were railroaded out of their positions and basically blacklisted, unable to work in this town again. And that's what you're seeing with this metoo movement. And some people have actually said that, if some innocent people get caught up in this sweep, too bad. It doesn't matter. I'm not sorry for that. Unfortunately, with these cases being tried in the court of public opinion instead of in a court of law, as is the case with all these metoo situations, then there is no penalty for falsely accusing a man of assault or rape. The women are, whether or not they're believed, even if the allegation is shown to be false, then they don't suffer any consequences. As we've seen more recently with this Columbia Mattress Girl case, she basically took revenge on a man that she had been in a relationship with, and when he decided he wanted to break it off, she accused him of raping her. And she's parlayed this lugging a mattress around the campus into a successful art career, despite the fact that she's completely devoid of artistic talent or personal integrity, while he was basically chased out of the school with pitchforks and had his professional prospects ruined and his reputation dragged through the mud. And Columbia, of course, later came back to him apologizing because it turned out that there was absolutely no evidence to suggest that he was really a rapist. But it's, it's too little too late. And unfortunately, because, again, these, especially on campus, these cases never make it to court. So it's not a situation where the woman can be prosecuted for making a false accusation. And it's because our culture reveres the victim above all else. This is the pinnacle of what a woman can hope to achieve, which is really disgusting, but I already covered that. This is the pinnacle of what a woman can hope to achieve. So women who haven't been assaulted or raped necessarily must accuse a innocent man of assault or rape in order to use him as a stepping stone to achieve their vaunted victim status, which means a lot of men are about to get thrown under the bus. And these men really have no recourse to anything except calling a woman a liar, which doesn't make them look good either, because you're supposed to believe the woman no matter what. But until we start punishing women who make false accusations, this is going to become more and more severe of a problem, because they realize that there's absolutely no risk to coming forward with these stories. They realize that there's nothing stopping them from grasping the gold ring of victimhood, except, well, their own personal integrity. But if you're already reaching for the gold ring of victimhood when you're not a victim, then personal integrity is something you dropped a long time ago. And so what if a few men lose their livelihood or their reputation? You're gonna get that 15 minutes of fame, and you're gonna be placed on that pedestal along with all the legitimate victims out there. Now, yeah, this is not good, because as this phenomenon spreads, we're going to see a lot of men dismissed as collateral damage, and this is not okay. Also, we need to look at who benefits in terms of what are these MeToo hysterias distracting from right now. I believe we have a case of the U.S. is being railroaded into yet another regime change war, this time with Iran, which, of course, the Project for a New American Century, the neoconservatives, have been trying to take out for more than a decade now. I mean, George W. Bush first threw them in the axis of evil way back more than 10 years ago. And unfortunately, with this designation of North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism, I believe this is the first step in creating a casus belli for going to war in Iran. Because North Korea and Iran, back in the day, used to collaborate with weapons technology and various other technologies. So I think that what is going on here is that this is gradually going to be built up into the idea that North Korea is supplying Iran with nuclear weapons, which is not true, and there's no evidence that this is going on, but they're going to cobble together all these bits of things that are dubiously true or partially true, and they're going to have to work a little harder than they did in Iraq, because fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So, yeah, no weapons of mass destruction are going to be trumpeted. Although, honestly, given the credulousness of the mainstream media these days, who knows? Maybe it'll be weapons of mass destruction again, and they'll just hope that the American people have a memory of a goldfish. Which they do. Sorry, it's true. But there are others who might think more deeply about this, and given the rise of alternative media since 2003, there is plenty of opportunity for more sane voices to be heard here, so they got to work a little harder to construct this narrative. Anyway, the idea that North Korea is selling Iran nuclear weapons, I think we can wait for this to pop up in the news within the next couple of weeks, if not months. Obviously, yeah, not true. But while we're all distracted by this Me Too hysteria, by the sexual witch hunt, by this second red scare, call it a pink scare if you want, these things are being slid in under our noses. This idea of North Korea being a state sponsor of terrorism. They can't afford to sponsor a bake sale at this point. North Korea is suffering greatly under the sanctions imposed on it by Western powers. And I don't think they're doing so great. They can't really afford to sponsor terrorism, at least not to the extent that countries like Saudi Arabia can, or Israel, or even the U.S. itself. I mean, it's come out pretty clear evidence that the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Israel were all jointly funding ISIS. And look no further than ISIS issuing a profuse apology when they accidentally bombed some Israeli site, and the fact that they hire an Israeli PR firm to unleash their videos upon the populace. So yeah, ISIS and Israel are like this. More importantly, I think that Americans need to realize that when the mainstream media is dangling salacious sex scandals in front of you, they're getting up to a whole lot of shit behind the scenes that you need to be paying attention to. Weapons of mass distraction are real. Don't become a victim.